Media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
What is going on, y'all? So we have been given a series of events, a version of a series of events, but it's not the full picture. What we're often told sounds reasonable sometimes. And the reality when it shows up often doesn't match what we're being told. We have a ceasefire that we've been told there was a ceasefire, but it hasn't really happened. We have leaders that govern completely differently from the way they campaigned and promised that that they would lead. Policies don't match what the reality is. That's not confusion. That's not a breakdown of some kind. That is a pattern. And today we are going to get into what that pattern is and what it means. There's a gap. And you have to mind the gap because the truth is often on the other side of that gap. So welcome to the Mission Ready Men briefing right here on the SHR Media Network, where faith in God is the standard and masculinity is not up for negotiation. Today is Thursday, April 9th, in the year of our Lord 2026. And we have a ton of stuff to get into. We're going to talk about the ceasefire. We're going to talk about what's going on in Virginia. We're going to talk about what's going on in New York and a whole bunch of other stuff. But before we get into that, please do me a favor and hit the like button, subscribe to the show, subscribe to the channel. Help us to defeat the big tech tyrants algorithm. I haven't referred to them in that way in a while, but it's true. It is true. It is still true. The algorithm that we are caught up in is trying to throttle us, but we're believing that you guys can help us out and get over that hump. We are still growing. It has slowed down, but we're still growing. So every like and every share, every comment in the chat helps us out tremendously. Now, before we get into everything, CNN just cannot stop being terrible. And there are other words I want to use, but CNN just can't help it. And this is completely off topic, but as I was doing some show prep last night, I came across a headline that said, "Remembering the Life of Michael J. Fox." And I was like, did he pass away? Really? And it turns out that no, he's still very much alive. And there was a period of time when there were a ton of death hoaxes. You had Morgan Freeman and Dolly Parton and a whole host of other celebrities that the rumors were going around that they had passed away. And then CNN did this. I mean, as I usually say, there are very few celebrity deaths that would really hit me hard. Excuse me. And I wouldn't be like crying if Michael J. Fox did pass away. I mean, I would be sad for his family and stuff like that, but it wouldn't really hit me that hard. But on the other hand, I'm a Gen X kid. So I grew up with Alex P. Keaton and Marty McFly. And so that is a part of my childhood, our generation's childhood, that would hit a lot of people very hard. And CNN just, yeah, let's put up this headline: remembering the life of Michael J. Fox. Just like I said, I know it's completely off topic, but CNN is absolutely terrible. Fake news all the way. And you know what? Since we're on the subject of CNN and their fake news, let's just go ahead and get right into this, because we talked about, I mentioned the ceasefire, and CNN put out this other ridiculous headline. And let's go ahead and put that up on the screen, because and this got President Trump, from everything I read, he was beyond livid when he saw this. And there are a whole host of reasons why this was just absolutely ridiculous. There we go. So this was CNN's headline. Iran claims victory, says it forced U.S. to accept 10-point plan. No, this was a complete and total lie. Iran claimed complete victory, said that they forced President. I mean, anyone paying attention should have been able to figure out that this was fake news. And then come to find out it was from some ridiculous Nigerian website that put it out there, and CNN amplified it. So imagine our allies in the region seeing this and thinking, what happened? How are they going to, now maybe they're fully aware that CNN is trash and they wouldn't pay it much attention, but some people probably would. And so imagine them seeing this and not being able to trust us as a partner in this anymore. Imagine the Iranian people seeing this. I know there's a internet blackout, but we know that things get through. The Iranian people who have been begging the United States for help see this, and they're like, what happened? How is this possible? It just completely undermines the trust that our partners would have in us. Now they took it down. They haven't retracted it. In fact, they said they stand by their reporting. But like I said, CNN just cannot help it. They cannot help being absolutely terrible. And like I said, there are other words that other people can use, and and it's just ridiculous. Oh my goodness. Well, I see that I see that some people in the chat are buying this, and all I can say is thank you for being here. Welcome. We appreciate it. But the story actually is that there was a 2-week ceasefire, alleged ceasefire negotiated. Now, almost immediately, it fell apart because within 2 or 3 hours, Iran retaliated against, or Hezbollah retaliated against Israel for strikes in Lebanon. The United States and Israel said that Hezbollah, Lebanon, was not a part of the deal. And hostilities have escalated at this point. The United States is still abiding by a ceasefire. They haven't, to my knowledge, had any retaliatory strikes yet, but we'll see. So they're really, the ceasefire is not really a ceasefire. And I have a theory. On that, and we are going to get into that here in a second. You know what? We're going to get into it right now. This was supposed to be a de-escalation. This was supposed to be a ceasefire. This, if you look at President Trump's pattern, he has used situations like this to advance another agenda, kind of a misdirection. I believe, and I could be wrong, but I believe that he is using this as an opportunity to move more assets in place, reposition some assets, recalibrate this whole thing, and use it as a strategic cover for something even bigger. Because after this ceasefire was announced, you had, let's see. I think it's the George Bush, the Georgia, and another. There are a few assets that are converging right now on the region. And I think that in the next, 4 or 5 days, we are going to see something big happen. They're going to use all of this nonsense as a pretext to just completely decimate everything and get rid of, basically end the war. I think that's what's going to happen. I could be wrong. I am not a military strategist. I'm just looking at some of the pieces that are moving around. And so I could be completely wrong, but that does seem to be his pattern. He, on March 25th, when he paused bombing and he moved the Tripoli into position. So now the bombing on our part is paused, and you have the Georgia, the Bush, and the Boxer that are all converging on that region for, like I said, I think something big. So we'll see what happens in the next, today's the 9th. We'll see what happens by, the 16th. It's going to be interesting to see. Now, we also have the Strait of Hormuz that is, was supposed to be open. That part of this ceasefire negotiation was supposed to be that they would allow transport through the strait. And now it turns out that they allegedly have planted even more mines in the strait. And, and allegedly have given a map, have provided a map for the people that they're allowing, the ships that they're allowing to go through, to be able to navigate those. I don't know. You can't trust anything Iran says. They're liars. They're terrorists. I don't know. We'll we'll just have to wait and see how this plays out. But like I said, I think that something big is going to happen in the next week or so, and Iran is going to regret all of this. That's my belief. That's my prayer, actually, because Iran is the Iranian regime, not Iran, the country, not the Iranian people. The regime, the mullahs, have been a scourge on this planet for 47 years. And it's time to get rid of them. So we'll keep watching this. I'm sure all the guys on the network are going to have their thoughts on it, and we do have a military expert on this channel, right, on the network right now. So I'm sure he has he does have some really good insight. He was on The Edge of Liberty last night with Sean, so that was fantastic. And so as things progress, I'm sure we'll get more and more insight from him and some others. But like I said, there is the gap between what we're being told and what we can actually see, what's actually happening. And you see it with the overseas, with everything that's going on overseas. And you see it here domestically as well. And you see it here domestically all over the place. And one place that we're really seeing that play out is Virginia. Abigail Spanberger is the people of Virginia, surprisingly, because the northern part of Virginia, all of the population centers are overwhelmingly leftist. And a lot of those people are regretting their vote because she has been so terrible. She promised 4 months before the election that she was not going to gerrymander. And I believe it was the very first day, or at least the first few days, she put in motion the proposal to gerrymander the seats, which the representatives in Virginia, it was split 6-5. One of the most fair representations, one of the most fair maps in the country. And almost immediately, she put in motion the plan to rig it so that it's 10-1. In the name of what? Fairness. And so people are seeing that. People are seeing her running on affordability and then signing all these new taxes into law, saying that she was going to be fair when it came to that she respected the Second Amendment. And yet there have been a whole host of Second Amendment infringements that have passed. The question isn't what she promised. The question is what she's actually doing. And this is only a matter of months. And the polling shows just how bad this is for her. And I think I have a clip here of well, I did anyway. I literally just did it and now it's gone. Anyway, the polling shows that her approval and her disapproval are nearly identical. And she is way behind what previous governors of the state of Virginia have been at this point in their governorship. And people who were paying attention during the campaign, they knew, we all knew that she was lying. We all absolutely knew that she was completely full of it. Here we go. I did have it. So let's take a listen to this and then we'll get into it a little more.
Well, Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger campaigned and won as a moderate Democrat, but just 3 months after a decisive victory, her approval rating reflects a deep divide. New polls show a favorability of 47%, so that's way below her Republican predecessor, Glenn Youngkin. At this time of his term, he rated at 54%. And Fox News contributor Mary Catherine Ham is a Virginia resident. She joins me now. It is interesting. She won by 15 points, and now you have this Washington Post poll that say her views are too liberal, 45%.
And that's the Washington Compost. That's not a conservative outlet like Breitbart or the Washington Times. That's the Washington Post.
And saying that, but you were there during the campaign. Do you think she's a different person now, or were they just trying to pull the wool over our eyes?
Well, I wasn't fooled, but she fell off fast because she started doing the things she actually wanted to do in office, and those things were to redistrict the fairest map in the country by rankings to the most gerrymandered redistricted map in the country, 10-1 in favor of Democrats, and not work on affordability because, of course, they passed a bunch of things in the Virginia legislature that will require payroll taxes and more taxes, and she kind of stayed silent through all of it. She didn't push back and say this might be inadvisable. People's costs are going up. People's cost of living is already very high in a place like Northern Virginia, and they look at her and they go like, you not only said that you weren't going to do this, she explicitly said that gerrymandering was bad for the state. Not very long ago, the state voted 6 years ago for a bipartisan redistricting committee, and they remember doing that. And so this feels like a power grab. It feels like it's off base for their lives, and it feels like she lied to them because she did.
I haven't seen a lot of Mary Catherine Ham lately, but she has always been one of my favorite commentators. I don't always agree with her on everything, but she always tells it like it is, and she is completely 100% correct. It feels like she lied because she did. And it's not just the economic issues, but she also is completely just allowing illegal immigrants to run roughshod over the state. She doesn't care how many people they kill. And when asked about it, she turns tail and runs. Because here's a clip of Abigail Spanberger actually being asked about this, and watch what she does.
He says 3 out of every 4 people arrested in Fairfax County are illegal aliens. They're asking you to discontinue sanctuary city policies. Any comment along those lines? Governor?
Nope.
Governor, any comment on the DHS request?
Of course not.
Well, she dodged, and here is exactly what DHS is requesting. Of the 4 defendants in Fairfax County murder trials this year, 3 are illegal aliens. Governor Spanberger must end her sanctuary policies that allow these illegal aliens onto our streets and work with DHS to protect the citizens of the Commonwealth. Well, look at what she's overseeing. Beyond this year, 7 illegal immigrants have been linked to 13 killings in Fairfax County. So she lives there. She has to have known before she took office that this was coming.
He says 3.
Of course she did. She knew, and she didn't care. She didn't care because she doesn't care about you. She's got her security detail keeping her safe. She couldn't care less if illegal aliens are running around all over the state of Virginia killing citizens. Couldn't care less. This is campaign language bumping up against real world consequences. And she doesn't care. None of the left do, because she's right in line with all of these leftist policies. She's right in line with all of them. And I've talked about all these websites where you can go and look at just how many American victims there have been of these illegal aliens. And we're actually going to talk about another one later on in the show. All of it's ridiculous to me, and it should be ridiculous to anyone who has a couple of firing neurons, that all of this is completely preventable. But they don't want to prevent it. And it's not like they have to do a whole lot. They don't have to do a whole lot. Just turn these people over to ICE. Look at what happens in places like Texas and Florida and other places where the local authorities cooperate with DHS and ICE. I'm not saying murders like this don't happen. I'm not saying that there isn't a problem in those places, but it is seriously mitigated when you look at places like California and Virginia and Illinois, where they coddle these illegal aliens, illegal criminal aliens, and allow them to think about this. By the time something like this happens, these people are not first-time offenders. They have been known to authorities. They have been arrested on average 10 to 12 times. And then the unthinkable happens. And sometimes it's already happened. Sometimes some of these people have been arrested for murder and manslaughter and are somehow released back out onto the street to do it all over again. Sometimes these illegal aliens are wanted for these heinous crimes in their own countries. Couldn't care less. Could not care less. And that tells you something that I also say quite often: they hate you. They hate you. They hate you because they know, left up to your own devices, you would never vote for them. So they have to import these criminals and their families and coddle them so that they can vote for them. I believe it's up to like 20, 23, 25% of our population right now is illegal aliens. And I'm gonna let you in on a little secret here too. The percentage of criminals among illegal aliens is 100%. Let me say that again. The percentage of illegal criminal aliens is 100%. They committed a crime when they crossed the border illegally. They committed a crime when they overstayed their visa. They are all criminals. All of them. Every single one of them. I know I'm going to get called names for that. But once again, I don't care. Because it is true. It is 100% true. And so when you have these illegal aliens who are committing these crimes, it goes from abstract theories, it goes from the theoretical to the practical and the personal. And the people who are personally affected by these crimes. And once again, these leftists couldn't care less. Leadership is not about presentation. And the presentation of Abigail Spanberger during the campaign was already terrible. I mean, she refused to answer questions. She campaigned like Joe Biden did when he was in his basement the entire time. And Virginians still fell for it. Well, they didn't fall for it. They just, that's just how a majority of them actually feel. Until reality comes up and slaps them in the face behind an illegal alien or a criminal, an American criminal who used the revolving door of these leftist jurisdiction justice systems. This is the pattern. This is the gap. There's what they tell you and what actually happens. And from their perspective, they don't want you to believe your lying eyes, because they will try to gaslight you and tell you that what you actually see is not what's happening. What you actually see is not what's real. What you're looking at is not reality. But what they're telling you and what is the reality, it doesn't match. Now, the fact that there is some apparent voters' remorse in Virginia over this is encouraging, because the voters, they will vote for you based on the promises that you make, but they also will react to the consequences. And if those consequences negatively affect them enough to make them rethink their vote, enough to make them actually say that they have some remorse, that's encouraging. That is encouraging, because let's take a look at this. Yeah, here we go. This is from Red State, and their headline says, Spanberger is cratering fast. New numbers show Virginia voters sour on Democrat governor. And this is, I'm gonna have to switch that because that was too small. Virginians are more divided over Spanberger than previous governors. She's got a 46% disapprove rate and a 47% approval rate. Glenn Youngkin was at 54%. Ralph Northam he was another terrible governor, but he was at his disapproval was only at 37%, while his approval was at 48%. Terry McAuliffe was only at 30%. Bob McDonnell was at 39%, but his approval was at 59%. So, I mean, and it's split between Republicans and Democrats. She is doing the worst out of all of them. And so that's encouraging. That is encouraging. And I am glad to see that. Because if this pattern holds, which I'm certain that it will, when the voters actually see what is happening, and not just see it, but actually understand it and are affected by it, that's when we're going to start to see some real change. And I think it's actually going to happen. I think that Spanberger is going to be a one-term governor, because she is not going to reverse herself on the taxes. She's not going to reverse herself on the gerrymandering. She's not going to reverse herself on the sanctuary city policies. She is not going to reverse herself on any of this. At least not in any timely manner that could mitigate this damage. If she does, it'll be a year or two down the road, and by that time, I think the damage will be done and will be permanent as far as her time in office goes. So we've talked about overseas. We've talked about what's happening locally in Virginia. But when you zoom out and you take an overarching view of this disconnect, this tension, this gap, it shows up pretty much everywhere. It shows up pretty much everywhere. Anywhere where the policy bumps up against reality and the two just cannot coexist. Reality will always rear its ugly head. So we're going to get into that here in a second, but first I want to get a word in from our sponsor. I got too many tabs open. People tell me that all the time. And now I'm actually starting to believe it may be true. But our sponsor for today's show is Carry Girl Gear. And if you head over to Carry Girl Gear and check this out, 35% off of all hoodies, long sleeves, zip ups, and sweatshirts on Carry Girl Gear and 7 Armors. So be sure to check that out. There's no code needed, and this sale ends Sunday at midnight. So if you want to make your wife or husband or boyfriend or girlfriend happy, head over to Carry Girl Gear or 7 Armors and check out all of the great designs that we have over there. carrygirl.com. All right, y'all. I am Biggie, and you are watching or listening to the Mission Ready Men briefing right here on the SHR Media Network. And now we're going to go ahead and get right back into the briefing. We are being fed a line that, and we have been for a long time. But we have been fed a line that fairness now requires treating people differently based solely on their race. Not outcomes earned, but outcomes adjusted based on race. And you can see this gap that we're talking about. You can see how it's being presented and what it actually does. And I am talking about none other than Zohran Mamdani. And this guy, he is the epitome of the Red-Green Alliance. And when I say the Red-Green Alliance, I am talking about the alliance between the left, and it's not just even the American left anymore, just the left in general, and Islam. The left being red, and Islam being the green. I mean, you saw how in New York, Kathy Hochul lit up New York City in green, I believe at the start of Ramadan or something like that, or some Islamic celebration. Just another slap in the face of New Yorkers. Then again, they voted for this guy, so who knows? But anyway, this is Zohran Mamdani talking about this new fairness policy that he's about to put in place. So let's take a look at this.
Amidst being in the wealthiest city in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, we already see an exodus of working and middle-class New Yorkers. So I don't have a hesitation in asking those who make the most amount of money in the city or the most profits in the city to pay a little bit more so that everyone can actually stay in this city. It's also something not just about justice or the ability for working-class people to live here. It is also actually about ensuring that corporations can continue to attract the top talent to this city. Because in a city where childcare costs more than $20,000 a year, I've heard from corporate leaders about how difficult it is for them to attract individuals who would work at their companies but want to raise a family, because you could be making $300,000 a year and you will feel that $20,000 a year because of the fact that we have allowed for the absence of affordable childcare to become reality here in this city.
That's not an issue of fairness. That's an issue of horrifically bad policies. Now, if you don't have more than a couple of firing neurons, or you are just completely ignorant of politics, what he said might actually sound reasonable. And that's what they do. Low information voters, they spout off this nonsense, and it sounds reasonable to them. Now, you and I understand exactly what he's saying here. And it's not reasonable. Not by a long shot. If you make $300,000 a year and you feel that $20,000 for childcare, that's not a problem with the availability of childcare. That's a problem with the policies that make it so that somebody who makes $300,000 a year in your city can't really afford to live comfortably. That's the problem. That is a huge problem. So he's basically saying he's begging people right now in this press conference. He's begging them not to leave, because if the people who he's talking about that he's asking them to pay more if they leave, well, then who's going to make up that gap? Well, he's going to start asking the people who are still there, who still make the most, to pay more, even though the fact that those people might make $100,000 a year, maybe, that burden is going to fall on them, and it's going to hit them even harder. But there's another clip I want to show you that this really gets to the heart of what we're talking about here, because, man, this guy, I mean, people say they get the government they deserve, and New Yorkers who stayed home and didn't vote, you get what you get. And what you get is this madness.
And while today's true cost of living measure confirms that the affordability crisis touches every corner of our city, we know that these effects are not applied evenly. So often, it is black and brown New Yorkers who are hit the hardest. This preliminary racial equity plan is the first step in developing a whole-of-government approach to tackling that reality. It is a plan that lays out these first steps to solve decades of neglect and discrimination, and it places the work of 45 city agencies within a singular framework. And while today's true cost of living measure confirms that the affordability...
This guy, somebody in the chat said he will save New York City. No, he will not. He is already destroying New York City. He's outlining here equity-based governance, resources directed based on racial disparities, budgeting, housing, all of that filtered through a race-centered lens. This is not, he said in that clip, a whole of government approach. And he said in his, in one speech, I think it might've been his victory speech when he won, said something along the lines of, there is no problem too small for government to fix, or something like that. That's ridiculous. Government shouldn't be anywhere near the small problems. Government should be about keeping people safe, period, end of story. And we all know how he feels about that, because he hates the police and he wants criminals to just run roughshod all over the city. And he's another one that refuses to cooperate with ICE. The issue, we know that disparities exist. It's a part of life. I mean, disparities exist in the context of families. Think about an intact family, loving home, 3 kids. There is going to be a disparity between all 3 of those kids. One kid might be smarter than the other. One kid might have an aptitude for something that the other one doesn't. That's life. That's just the way it goes. And then disparities may exist between those children depending on the choices that they make. Nobody ever wants to talk about that. They only want to talk about the equity. They want to talk about making sure that everybody has the same outcome. Not the same opportunity, the same outcome. That is a communist concept that has never worked. It's only worked to make everybody equally miserable. You can't tax and regulate people into prosperity and success. It doesn't work that way. But he wants this equity, justice narrative to take hold, and all he's going to do with this nonsense is make people even more miserable. The disparities exist because the policies and the systems allow for that to happen, as it should be. The government can't solve everything. These policies don't take into account family structure, as I mentioned, don't take into account education decisions, don't take into account criminality, exposure to crime, don't take into account the cultural priorities of certain groups. It doesn't take into account the choices that people make. And so that family that makes, or that person that makes $300,000 a year in New York, they made choices that allowed for that to happen. The person in New York who makes $20,000 a year and needs all kinds of assistance, they made choices too. They didn't make the same ones that the person making $300,000 a year made. Therein lies the disparity. And people will say, well, the person making a $20,000 or $25,000, they didn't have the same opportunities to make those decisions. Well, I call shenanigans on that. Yes, they did. They may have to work a little harder to seek out those opportunities, but they're there. You're not owed anything. You are not owed anything except the opportunity. And if you don't work to take advantage of that opportunity, if you just think somebody's going to hand it to you, well, then you're going to be looking up at the person making $300,000 a year, asking if you can get a raise from them because they're your boss. You see it all the time. People go to the same school, in the same classes. One of them makes choices that allows them to own or run a business. The other one, who took the same classes, maybe even got the same grades, made different choices. Now they're talking to that person, asking for a job. The government can't solve that. That's personal responsibility. So when you remove the choices that people make and the other variables that are at play, the only thing left is race. That becomes the default explanation, and that becomes the basis on which people like Mamdani and his ilk make these ridiculous policies. And it's not going to stay contained into this proposal that he's got going on. It ends up in hiring practices, education, law enforcement. It raises equal protection concerns. I mean, it's just, and the thing is, it's so obvious to anyone who actually spends even a little bit of time just thinking about it and not just regurgitating what the left feeds them. There are consequences to the choices that you make. And expecting the government to bail you out when you make bad choices, that's only going to cost the taxpayers that much more money. And you're never going to learn. You're never going to learn. So when the government starts to think of race first, when the government takes race into account first, equality doesn't exist anymore. And equality is what the civil rights movement was all about, if I'm not mistaken. But this completely destroys any concept of equality in the name of equity. And those two things do not mean the same thing. They promise fairness. They use division to do it. And then the outcome is unequal treatment. But they justify it by their good intentions. This isn't just a policy framework. This is a philosophy. And when that philosophy starts shaping how crime is explained, who's responsible for crimes, who isn't, that is once again when the real life, real world consequences show up. And when those consequences show up, somebody gets hurt. And I said we were going to talk about this, so here we go. There is a mother who was alive at one point and within an instant, gone. Killed by an illegal alien with a hammer while she was at work. This was not some random happenstance. This was not some unfortunate, unavoidable incident. This is not one of those instances where these things just happen. No. This one comes with this one comes with a paper trail. Once again. Decisions were made, orders were issued, policies enforced, all before this woman paid the price. And here again, this is the gap between what we're told and what actually happens. There was a Haitian national entered illegally the United States in 2022, was issued a final order of removal, I believe in 2024, but then was granted TPS, temporary protected status, and allowed to stay. And then he beat a 51-year-old mother to death at a Florida gas station. I had the video queued up, but I'm not going to play it because You can find it. It's not worth it. It's not worth, well, I shouldn't say it's not worth showing, but I'm just not going to play it. I'm just not going to play it. My wife was playing it the other day in another room. Her computer volume was normal, but I could hear the strikes. And I was like, what is that? And it was the video of this woman being beaten to death. She was going about her business at work. And it turns out that the guy, they had a interaction at some point before, and he lured her out there by using the mallet or hammer on her vehicle. And so when she came out to see what was going on, he just ran up and started hitting her. And this is where they will say, this isn't a political issue. Don't politicize her murder. But the system made it political. The system made it political long before she paid the price for it. He was known to authorities already. He should not have been here. When they found him and realized he had entered illegally, he should have been deported immediately. But no, the Biden administration saw something, decided to do something different. Just like in Virginia with Spanberger. And now a woman is dead. And I mentioned before, these people who commit these crimes have been arrested on average 8 to 12 times before they commit these crimes. We don't know he hasn't killed before. The brutality with which he killed this woman suggests that he probably has. In fact, I think he's a suspect in another murder. So there you go. He was known to the system and they chose not to act. They chose to let him roam the streets, just like they choose to let a bunch of these criminals roam the streets. That's again, that's the chasm between what they tell us and what actually happens. And they will cite these ridiculous statistics about how illegal aliens commit fewer crimes than native-born American citizens. That's complete and utter nonsense. They base that assertion on one flawed study, but because it supports their narrative, that's what they go with. But these sanctuary jurisdictions and these blue cities that allow for these criminals to just roam the streets, get locked up for a crime, and then before the arresting officers even finish their reports, they're walking out the station, only to commit another crime. This isn't something that you couldn't have seen happen. This is something that those of us who pay attention have said was going to happen. And we've seen it play out over and over again. There's a website, I can't remember, I think it's How Many Is Too Many or something like that, that chronicles how many people have been killed at the hands of illegal aliens. And the last time I looked at it, I didn't even get through the A's because it's in alphabetical order. I mean, it's ridiculous. And every single one of those victims did not have to die. And the left couldn't care less. Couldn't care less. Somebody said in the chat, not all illegals are criminals. Wrong. Incorrect. Every illegal alien in this country, I said this earlier, every illegal alien in this country is a criminal. They committed a criminal act by coming here illegally. End of story. Now, whether they commit acts like this, okay, maybe they don't, but they're still criminals. And of course, before somebody says it, of course, minor children who were dragged over here by their parents, of course, they're not criminals, but they still need to be deported. Yes, they still need to be deported. So, as I said, they say that illegal aliens commit crimes at lower rates than American citizens do. But Texas and other places where they track these things tell a completely different story. Illegal immigrants in the state of Texas and others, I believe Florida tracks this as well, they show up in disproportionate shares of violent crimes. But even that doesn't even that's not the point. The point is that the victims of those crimes didn't have to be victims because the crimes that they committed were preventable by not allowing them here in the first place and by booting them out when we find them. The crimes committed by these illegal aliens, especially the ones who have been found and given these deportation orders, every one of those crimes is downstream from the decision to allow them to stay. And that makes every single one of those crimes preventable. And every one of those victims did not have to suffer at the hands of those illegal aliens. You can come at me with all kinds of statistics, whatever the case may be, that's fine. But the fact is that these crimes were preventable. These crimes were preventable, and they did nothing to stop it. They facilitated it by allowing them to stay. They come in, they encounter the system, they're allowed to stay. Crime, victim, sometimes death. You disrupt that chain at any point prior to the crime, and the outcome is likely to change. That's what makes it different, because the policies in place are directly linked to the outcome that we see. That's why it's completely different from crimes committed by American citizens. Even though a lot of those crimes are completely preventable as well, if we would just lock those people up too. But nobody ever wants to talk about that. I do, but you know how the left is. So when they choose to not to enforce these laws, the consequences of those choices move from the theoretical to the practical. Those consequences are now in the real world with real victims. We enforce some laws aggressively. Tax evasion, and all kinds of other crimes that the victims aren't in the hospital or dead. But then other crimes that they, for all intents and purposes, just get ignored. And people will say, you should love your neighbor. I do. This is not about hate. This is not about anger. This is about clarity, and this is about truth. This is about reality. And the reality is that they made a decision, and a woman in this particular instance paid the price. Until people acknowledge that and make up their minds to do something about it, this pattern is going to continue. And the pattern, once you actually open your mind to it, if you haven't already seen it, once you do, you can't unsee it. Unless you willfully ignore it, which a lot of these leftists do. And we see the consequences of what gets enforced and what gets ignored. And when the things that get ignored show up, those consequences are very often deadly. All right, I want to pivot because I talked about something on the last show and I just mentioned it, but I want to get back to it because it kind of goes along with the theme that we're talking about today when we talk about what we see versus what they're telling us, and that chasm in between. I think the tide is turning, but we are still watching a real-time experiment in what happens when culture tries to mess with God's design and redesign boys and girls. Not refine them, not anything healthy, but reshape them, redefine them. And it starts at home. And if there's no good home life, then all kinds of things start to go wrong. If you change what a boy is allowed to become, then you change what society will produce over time. This isn't about toys or what boys are or not allowed to do. It's about the trajectory that we're on. And so I mentioned this woman in the last show, and I want to expand on it a little bit because it's quite sad. It's actually quite sad. Gavin Newsom's wife, Jennifer Siebel, she has We played the clip of her talking about the firing of Kristi Noem and Pam Bondi and her ridiculous take on that. But she talked about, or she discussed at some forum, giving her boys dolls to play with and changing pronouns and stories that she read them and all this stuff like that. So let's listen to this and then we'll get into it.
I've given our boys dolls, even if they tear the head off. I've given them dolls to learn that care and caregiving is not just an activity that's reserved for women, but that it's also an activity that is a responsibility of men. What I've done with
on one point, she's not wrong, because men do have a responsibility to care for their wives, their families, but you don't teach them their role in that by having them play with dolls. Men have a responsibility to teach their sons how to do that. And men do that by setting the example at home, how they treat their wives, how they treat their children, how they treat people they interact with on the street, how they interact with their children when they're teaching them things, when they're playing with them. Not with dolls. But this isn't about dolls or sports, which she talked about, and maybe we'll play that clip too here in a second. But it's about the traits that are being encouraged and instilled in these boys and which ones are suppressed. The gap that we talked about, it shows up here in the culture, in the intention of what she thinks is a good intention versus the outcome. There's an article I read, an essay called The Great Feminization. And it outlines how how society has been feminized, where it emphasizes emotional sensitivity over resilience and being able to overcome challenges. It encourages passivity over assertiveness and consensus over conviction and leadership. Her boys, Gavin Newsom's boys, are being shaped for environments that discourage taking risks, that discourage leadership, that discourage physical and competitive outlets. She talked about in another clip how she was horrified. Yeah, let's listen to that too.
boys, we all know, I think, or increasingly are realizing that boys are moving away from sort of the more progressive. Boys that spend time online are moving a little bit.
Okay, let me help you out. Boys are becoming less liberal. Boys are moving away from the leftist Democrat madness.
I'm trying not to be political here, but are moving to the right, and being sort of influenced by the Andrew Tates and some of that sort of alt-right socialization online that we know is very, very dangerous.
Just so that we're clear, I am no fan of Andrew Tate. I am not going to defend anything Andrew Tate has said or done, but she's wrong. And we'll see here in a second.
My husband and I were alarmed when our kids were watching sports online, and my son knew about Andrew Tate and thought he was pretty cool, and thought that his Republican grandfather.
Andrew Tate is not cool, okay? I think we can all agree on that. But that doesn't mean that every influencer, every person that you see when you're watching sports is somehow an Andrew Tate avatar. It doesn't work that way. Andrew Tate's a bad guy, yes. Stipulated for the record. But that doesn't mean that because he is a bad guy and he has a following, that all of it should be thrown out.
Who's not a Trumper, but a fiscal conservative, thought that my father would like Andrew Tate. So that's scary. We're like one of the most progressive households, and our son is confused and asking all these questions. We're working on legislation to hold tech companies accountable and help them be a force for good in our kids' and families' lives.
Okay, that's enough of that. If you are depending on tech companies to be forces for good in your children's lives, then you have failed as a parent, because you should be the force for good. And you should be encouraging them and providing them with other forces for good that align with your values. You shouldn't, there's no need to force legislation to do that. That's your job. But the issue that they have is that they believe that masculine traits of any kind are dangerous or outdated. And we've talked before on this show about how men should be dangerous, but obviously not in the way that Andrew Tate is dangerous. But these masculine traits are framed as dangerous, and softer feminine traits are framed as safe and socially acceptable. Parenting is, parenting is a delivery system for ideology. And boys receive these mixed signals because the world still needs men. And they're encouraged to a lesser extent to be strong when it's needed, but they're not taught how. They're not going to be taught by this and by playing with dolls. So they want men to be strong, but then they won't do the things that are necessary to instill that strength in them. And then at the same time, don't display that strength in your everyday life. This is a problem. This is a problem that here on this channel we're trying to address when it comes to training men to be men, to be those forces for good in their families and in their communities that they were called to be by God. Weakening or and I'm kind of running out of time here, but weakening or suppressing these masculine traits doesn't eliminate the need for them. Not at all. It creates a gap. And that gap is going to get filled either by men stepping up or by the true toxic personalities that don't share the same values as you. And then, where will you be? The consequences of this don't show up overnight, but they do show up. They do show up. A society that discourages strong men is not a safe society. Look at what's going on in Europe. That is a recipe for disaster. A society that doesn't encourage strong men and doesn't value those masculine traits becomes dependent, which I think we've established at this point on this show and others that we've done. That's what they want. They want you dependent. That's why they want to disarm you too. They see manhood as a cultural stereotype, but the Bible calls men to lead with humility, protect what's been entrusted to them, and to provide and take ownership, provide for their families, and take ownership of that responsibility. And that's not to raise boys to be dominant, not to raise boys to be aggressive in the wrong ways, obviously, but to serve their families, their communities, in some cases their country, with strength. God called us to be accountable. Now, because we're seeing this on the stage in this particular family, when you see how the identities of these boys is being shaped in their homes and in society itself, you see how it shows up on every level, how it shows up on a global stage, how it shows up in our politics, how it shows up in our culture. And when you see that, then you understand what's really going on. And it's not good. And so we need to step up and step into our roles as men and as fathers so that we can combat this type of madness. All right, y'all, I'm coming up on it. They can shape the message. They can control how it's framed. They can tell you exactly how they want you to see it, but they cannot change what actually happens. They can try to change your perception, but they can't change what actually happens. And what actually happens is what matters. Not the headline, not the talking point, not the spin, the outcome. And across everything that we've talked about here, the story really is to mind the gap, because what they're telling you and what you can actually see don't match. And there's really, that doesn't require any interpretation. It just is what it is. All right, y'all, that's going to do it for us here today. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for being in the chat. Please be sure to check out the channel, the SHR Media channel, and all the great shows that we have there. Sean, Jersey Joe, BZ, Lyle. Head over there and check out all of those great shows. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, comment. Pray that we continue to grow and break through and reach as many people as we possibly can. All right. We are here to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ and carry the banner of faith, freedom, and hope into future generations. So if what we talked about here matters, share it, share the show, share the channel, bring other men into the fight. And if you want to wear what you stand for, head over to missionreadymen.com, click Shop 7 Armors, and check out all the great designs we have there about bold faith, true grit, and unapologetic patriotism. And while you're there, click on the SHR shop and check out all of the designs that we have for all of the shows on the channel. And remember, when seconds count, the police are only minutes away, but the Lord is right there with you. So keep your prayers going up and your head on a swivel. God bless.